We're talking today with Anthony DeJager of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Mr. DeJager is a little bit unusual as an interview subject because he was a witness to World War II as a child in the Netherlands and later served in the U.S. military. Okay, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born on June 25th, 1936 in The Hague, Netherlands. Like all my brothers and sisters, I was born at home, except the youngest, that's in the later, she was born in the hospital.
Okay.
I went to school there, and I remember a lot from the war.
Okay. Before we get to the war, tell me, what did your father do for a living?
My father actually worked for the Department of Interior. It was a, they took, you know, the interior of the Netherlands, and he was also employed there while they were doing this building of the dikes.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the book on it, and that they claimed the land from that lake that was there.
Right. So in the interior of the Netherlands, a lot of it is flood control and water management and dikes and canals.
Yes.
So there's a lot of work to do.
Yes.
Okay.
He was just, I mean, he didn't have a job that had too much to do with the actual workings. He was more or less like a reception and call them concierge, is that what they call them?
Well, that's the phrase. Yeah. So basically, he was an office. He worked in an office.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, and how many children were in your family?
We actually had 6. An older brother who was 6 years older than me. He was born in 1930, and then I had was me. I'm now the oldest, and then I had a sister who's a little over a year younger than me in the war, and then there was another brother, and then another brother, and then I got a younger sister who was born after the war.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to go back. So you're only 4 years old, or not even quite 4, when the Germans actually attacked the Netherlands in 1940.
Yes.
Okay. So what kinds of things do you remember about that period?
About that period, no, that's totally nothing. I knew there was something going on, and no, it was just for a child, you know, every normal life. You played with your friends and you went to school.
Okay. Now, so you don't particularly remember, do you remember the Germans first coming into the town and taking over?
That's when my father told me about it, yeah, and especially in, I don't remember the early years, but like I said, my main memory is from that winter of 1944 going into 1945.
Right.
And that's when I first, you know, things come together when you're growing up and say, hey, what's going on, you know, and stuff like that, where you hear about it. We had a radio in the house, so my dad did keep up. He was kind of in the underground, what they call them, and they would. I never seen what my dad did, but you know, we had enough to worry about staying alive and getting fed.
Okay. Well, to have a radio, that was already illegal.
Yes, it was. And at times I was asked to watch outside the house for vehicles. If there was a vehicle coming, we turned everything off. And I don't know, this was not a transmitting radio though, because it was just listen to the BBC out of England, I believe it was, what he told me. And I would have to look for if there was any vehicles out, especially a little square one with a little thing on top that would go around. signal finders, I believe they were. That's all I had to do. That was my job.
Do you know where he kept the radio? Was it out in the open?
We had them, I do. We had an aquarium. It was an aquarium that did not use pumps or anything. It was plants and there was fish in it, and it was underneath in the stand of the aquarium. That's where it was. So it was hidden.
All right. Now, you had mentioned before we came into the session that you would observe aircraft flying back and forth.
Yes, yes. During the night, we would see them. It'd be these bombers. I think it was, I don't know the numbers of them, but it was the big ones with 4 engines,
right.
And they were way up there. And then the Germans had searchlights going up, and I'd see stuff, because you had a short time to see it because you weren't allowed outside. You weren't even allowed to have lights on in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And the cars all had no lights on them, because they didn't want to be able to see us from up above, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I saw those. And then towards the end of the occupation, in the mornings a lot, I saw bombers come from the other end to the other end of town where the Germans were. Matter of fact, it was close by the Peace Palace that they have in the Netherlands, and they somehow spared that. They did not get bombed, and it would light up the sky like a sunset in the morning. And
will that be the anti-aircraft fire shooting at them?
Yeah, and I would see, well, the actual bombing and that part of the city was on fire. And I would see in the reflection of the windows from the neighbors on the other side of our complex, and I could see the windows rattling from the bombs and stuff. So it's terrifying.
Now, what neighborhood or what kind of neighborhood did you live in?
I lived in an industrial area right along a canal, and just a few streets down there was a harbor. It was called the Loch Haven. It was the neighborhood where we lived, and it was mostly industrials, and where we lived then is where all the housing started, all government housing. And we've seen airplanes drop bombs on the factories. One time my brother and I were standing outside, and a bomb fell down not too far from our house and blew us right back into the house. And then of course all the windows came out, broke, so we just boarded them up. That's how we had to live. And then occasionally, well, not very often though, we saw a dog fight. I seen a dog fight once during the day. That was, and of course there was a loser because we saw a parachute. And I don't know what it was, who got shot down.
Right. Okay. Now, how common was it for the city to be bombed? Did that happen very often, or just a few times?
No, not actually. The city that really got it is well known was Rotterdam, and that was just turned into a pile of rubble, from what I understand.
Well, the Germans bombed it in 1940.
Yes.
And I guess the question is, did the Allies bomb it later because it was a major port?
Yes, I believe so. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but like I said, I was younger. It is just, I find it amazing that we survived, actually, because we had these rockets that were shot at England, London mainly, because London got bombarded pretty bad too with these V2s and V1s. and you would hear them take off, and my dad says, as long as you hear the noise, you're fine. If the noise stops, watch out.
Mm-hmm.
And that only happened a few times, not very often. The Germans were good with all their stuff that they had.
Mm-hmm.
And they got launched not too far from where I lived, I guess, and I could see them go over and actually on their way to London.
Right. Yeah. So these were the V2s. These were the big ballistic missiles.
Yes.
They had. Yeah. The V1s were the buzz bomb things. Those were smaller and shorter range.
Yeah,
so
they had an engine on the top. There was actually a bomb
right.
with a firecracker on it, so to speak, or something. I'd call them firecrackers.
Yeah. Okay. But those were not launched from your area.
No. No. Those, I don't know where they came from.
Mostly off of the Belgian and French coasts while they were still there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But still, I mean, you were there with the V2s going. Now, you mentioned a couple of other things. One of them, you talked about refugees living under your house.
Yes. Yes, we did. I come home from school one day, and there are these 4 guys. And they were people from, young men from our area, our block, that somehow got down out of their apartments and climbed the fences that everybody had in their yards. You know, we had the lower apartments had a backyard, and they were hidden under there for, you know, I don't remember how long. It's been, and because I didn't know about them, because being 8 years old, and I would have to be quiet, you know, and not talk about things.
Okay.
You know.
Now, why were they hiding?
They, like I said, they were the younger ones,
Right.
like this Mr. Gerard Baumet did in his interview. He got picked up, actually, and he was 18 at the time. And these young men were hiding from being deported or transported, I shouldn't say deported, transported to the factories and coal mines in Germany.
Right.
That's how that happened.
Right. The Germans were recruiting people as forced laborers, basically.
Exactly. And we have had a German soldier come in our house. Well, these guys were down there.
Mm-hmm.
And I can still see the kid's face with the helmet, the rifle. And, you know, I swore he couldn't be any older than 14 or 15.
Mm-hmm.
And they came looking around, for, of course, for people, and they also searched rooms. If you had more than 1 blanket per person, they took them. Why? I don't know. They just took them.
All right. Now, the area you were living in, this is one that was pretty well isolated from the main German forces in 1944. The Allies went up into the interior of the Netherlands toward Arnhem, and the Hague is over on the coast.
Yeah.
So you were in a kind of tricky, the Germans had fortified the area, and the Germans hold that till the end of the war.
They
but
did.
what was that last year like? What problems did you have just living there?
Well, they starved us. You had a coupon book where you could get a loaf of bread a day, or you could buy some milk and stuff. As far as that, we were so malnourished that every night my dad would put my sister and I on the table and clean up because we were kids, we were playing, we were on the street in the concrete, and we had sores on our knees from being malnourished.
Mm-hmm.
And they, we just didn't eat. We had nothing. And then one day my father come home with tulip bulbs, and we cooked those and ate them. I did.
Mm-hmm.
And as I recall, They were edible.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with sugar beets. We ate a lot of sugar beets that we could, my mother would just cook them and we'd eat them.
Where would you get the sugar beets from? Were those?
They were there were places where they were distributed, and my dad was always roaming around looking for stuff, you know. As a matter one time during the night, him and a neighbor were gone all night on a bicycle with a big box in the front of it. They were out raiding farmers,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd come home with some food, and before you knew it, it was gone in a hurry because everybody wanted something to eat. And then we also had one neighbor who worked, her husband worked in the slaughterhouse, and he brought home everything that got thrown away, and his wife somehow knew how to cook it.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister and I were fed by them now and then. It was a feast for us.
Now, did your father keep going to work during the war? Did he keep his job?
You know, I don't remember too much of that. I'm not sure.
Did you go to school then?
Yes,
Okay, so the schools were still open.
yes, till the last part where people started to tear the buildings apart. They took everything that was wood, windows, everything that was wood was taken, because that's the only heat we had in our house is wood heat. We had no gas.
Right.
We did have some gas for a while because my dad somehow managed to bypass the gas meter. And he could have went to jail for that. And my mother kept following the gas company man, and she convinced them for a coupon for a liter of milk to put everything back.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my mother doing that, following this guy, and he fixed it, and nothing happened.
All right.
That's the only heat we had. We had no heat in the house other than the wood. We cooked, Mom and Dad cooked on a wood stove in the kitchen.
Okay. Now, as the war, you're getting into the spring of 1945.
Yes.
And you were listening to the radio. I mean, did your father talk at all about what he heard? Did you know that the Germans were losing?
Yes, we heard about that, and little did I know at that time, the man who turned out to be my father-in-law was in that country right there. I showed you the maps of where he was and where he came in. And yes, and then all of a sudden one day, the planes came flying over so low, it scared the hell out of me. And I crawled under the kitchen table and so forth. And I understand, then after a few more, my mom let me look outside, and I could even see the pilots or co-pilots in those planes as they flew over, waving at us. They were dropping food in boxes. And just like Gerard said, they were all picked up by all these underground people, and then they distributed them. And there was a note attached to those, according to Gerard, that said, if any German takes those, you are, I can't remember what he said, but they got all that food in there. And this is where, for the first time, we had corned beef hash. There was a lot of that in these cans, a lot of corned beef hash. And I still like corned beef hash. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned to like it, and I still do.
Okay. Now, how long was it before any Allied ground troops showed up?
Well, all of a sudden, one day, my brother had already left.
Mm-hmm.
He was at 14, sometime in November of 44,
Mm-hmm.
he got on a bicycle and left because my parents could not feed him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we did not know where he was. He went through where all the battles were I think that area up towards Arnhem and that, and he crossed all these bridges on bicycle, and he wound up in the northern part in Friesland on a farm in a town by the name of Suyamir. And we did not know where he was. We had no phone.
Mm-hmm.
There was no mail.
Right.
There was nothing. So he was gone. And then foods got to be a little more available. And it just,
Do you remember seeing Allied troops come into the town?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, that was really kind of cool. They were Canadians. We had Canadians on that part of the country. They were Canadians. The U.S., like my father-in-law, was more or less into the border and going into Germany,
Right.
into the concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my father-in-law's job was, he was in ordnance. His job was to take all the ammunition and anything out of tanks and what have you, arms off from the dead soldiers and stuff like that. And then one day I step outside, and there was a company of soldiers marching, and they were all neatly in a row like they should be. And there was a guy standing to the side calling the cadence, and sure enough, they were Canadians. And that was the day that I remember it had to be the happiest day of my life. You know, being a child, not knowing a whole lot of what was going on, but that was really, 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 that was it. It
Okay.
was,
Now, I know from the sort of general history of the period that times were still not easy in the Netherlands after the war.
No, they never were. They not for a while. And our main problem was food, and of course restoration. And the businesses in my area by the harbor there were starting to pick up, so we could see. And as children, my neighbors, there was four of us boys. We used to go into the industrial area, and we'd watch steam locomotives moving the stuff around. That was always kind of cool. Always been impressed with trains anyway. So.
Okay. Now, did your father kind of go back to his regular work? Or?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And usually on Sundays, he would take me to his work. We'd ride the streetcar and go to his work, because part of his job was the heating system and start the furnaces, because it was actually coal-fired heating in the buildings with hot water, I believe. So then, yeah, that's what I remember. Things are starting to slowly get normal. My school, I went to school, and I started at the age of 14. I got myself a little job with one of my friends. His uncle had a butcher shop. I learned how to be a butcher.
Okay. Now, when did you make contact with your brother again?
You know, I can't recall. I really can't. And I am sorry, but he himself did not talk about it much. My brother and his wife, well, they immigrated to Canada in 1953.
Okay.
And they settled after working in several farms. They settled in London, and he turned out to be a well-known architect. And he, but I don't remember him coming back.
But he didn't come home to live with you after the war.
Yes, he did.
Okay, he did.
He
All
did
right.
come back. Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, him and I, we slept in the same bed together. That was
Okay.
normal.
All right.
I mean, we had this small apartment, and there were 5 kids. The
Right.
6th one was coming. And my brother was always, he was very intelligent, and so, but he immigrated to Canada.
Okay.
Just
Like Jerry Balma did, yeah.
like Gerald did, and he wound up in London, where Gerald was. Also, this is about as coincidental as can be.
Yeah. So he's talking here about the interview with Gerard Balma. That's B-A-U-M-A. For anyone interested in looking him up, he is on our website, and you can see that story. Okay. All right. Now, for you, how did you stay in school after you got your job with the butcher shop?
Oh yeah, my job, butcher shop, was only Saturdays.
Okay.
And because the stores were closed on Sunday and on Saturday, and then the boss would let me go for a couple hours to let me do my soccer. I played soccer. I've been playing soccer for a long time.
Okay.
And then I got to be a butcher, and
All right.
one day we had, my dad's brother came over. He lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he came over and visited. And his son came also, and his name is Anthony DeJager also. And they were talking to me, and they said that this was back in the days when the United States was looking for people, for workers. And he convinced me, or talked to me, and I decided, you know, I'm at the stage of my life, I got to start doing something. I was 18 then, no, 19, when he said, when they visited. And I started going to get the ball rolling to go to the United States.
Okay. So because you had family here, they could sponsor you, and that made it easier. Yeah.
They had to have, I had to have somebody here to sponsor me and have a job waiting for me. And he did.
Okay. So when do you actually go to the U.S.?
It was on Mother's Day, 1956.
Okay. All right. So you're almost 20 years old at that point.
Yes,
Not
I
quite.
was.
Yeah. All right. And then how do you get to the U.S.?
How did I
Did you fly or take a boat? Or?
Oh, I was one of the 4 big. They started sending us by plane back then, and I got to fly on a Lockheed Constellation. And of all places, they stopped in Dublin, Ireland. And that's where I thought, well, I'll have something to drink. And I thought, well, Irish coffee sounds good. I didn't realize I was full of booze. And then we wound up in Newfoundland because I flew on a Lockheed Constellation. They're a real unique airplane, real sleek with the three tails and stuff like that. And wound up in Newfoundland. We had to stop there and then into New York, where I got a bus to New York Central Station, where I got on the New York Central Railway to Kalamazoo. And this was, of all days, we had a whole 24 hours delay by Detroit and Windsor because of the tornado that day.
Okay.
The tornadoes of 1956 that came through Grand Rapids here and went down, and then of course storms flooded the tunnels of the airplanes. So then
For the trains.
yeah, the tracks. So we just the day after, I believe it was Mother's Day, I arrived in Grand Rapids at the station.
All right. And now, what kind of job did they have for you?
I worked at John Whitaker's Furniture.
Okay.
My job was to put the hardware on furniture. And I didn't care for the factory work. So I was there for, I don't know, less than a year. And I decided I want to go back to meat cutting. So I went to Meijers. I got hired at Meijers. I worked for them for 10 years. And then I worked in Ionia, and there was a job opening in Grand Rapids, and they said, now you're doing fine in Ionia. So I went to work for L.V. Eberhard. I worked for him for well over 30 years.
Right. Okay. Now, in the process of all this, though, of course, you also wind up at a certain point in the U.S. Army.
Yes.
So how did that happen?
Well, that was kind of, you know, I decided, because the draft was going on, you know, and so I says, you know what, might not be a bad idea to get that out of the way. I hadn't any ties. I did have a girlfriend, but the Dear John letter came soon after I was in there, and you know, got posted on the bulletin board. But I thought, well, let's get this out of the way. Yeah, so I did. I went to the draft board, and they drafted me. Whether I was, it didn't matter that I was not a citizen yet. So
yeah, that's where they did draft people. If you were a resident, if you were a legal resident, you could be drafted.
Yes, I was a legal resident.
All right.
Yes.
Now, what year was it that you went in?
I went in 1958.
Okay.
On November 18, 1958, I got put on a bus to Detroit, where we got the physical, spend the night there, and the next day I went, of all things, by train. They used trains. I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky. They put us in an overnight train, and we slept in a Pullman.
Okay, so you got a Pullman car.
That was
they
cool.
don't usually do that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and from then on, I had my basic training in Fort Knox.
All right. Now, describe what that basic training was like. What did they do with you?
Oh, it was, you know, you have these drill sergeants, and they are mean, you know. I mean, you got to make a man out of you. So, yes, the basic training was interesting. And I did all the infiltration courses and the grenade growing and the rifle shooting and all that. And I passed and all that. And then my second 8 weeks, they sent me to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where I had to learn how to type.
Okay.
And crazy.
All right. Well, of course, let's see. Now, in the basic training part, now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust?
It was not hard at all. I mean, I was capable. I was always been pretty healthy, I thought.
Right. You know, you'd been athletic, but you were also, were you older than most of the guys?
I was, no, I
You
was,
were like 22 or something.
I was 22, yeah. That maybe that was older. Yeah, no. I had a lot of friends in there, and no, it was not hard at all.
Okay.
No,
All right.
I just,
I was also going to ask, when you first came to the U.S., did you know any English?
yes, yes, because the education system in the Netherlands is good.
Mm-hmm.
Of all things, I had to speak Dutch, of course. We got Dutch, French, German, and English.
Mm-hmm.
And I got corrected by my English teacher so many times. He says, "You don't speak English, you speak like American."
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't like that. But I do, I have an accent, and that nobody ever loses an accent, you know. And no, English it was broken, like, but yes, I know, I've made myself understandable real easy.
Okay. And certainly by the time you were in the Army, you had been doing that
Oh,
for
yeah.
a long time. So,
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So now you go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Fort Sill is mostly an artillery base,
Yes.
but they had training for typists as well? Or,
No,
or they just,
well,
gave
yeah,
you a
they
job?
did. This was but they just kind of put me in there, and I got to be company clerk for an Honest Jan and lacrosse training unit where they do their 6 weeks training,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had a turnover every other week and then I got to watch them. I was like radar, you know, more or less at the 4077.
Right. So you were basically working like a company clerk.
Yes, yes, it was company clerk, which it was fine. I was slow because I was a typer like that, but I don't know why they did that, but you know, the Army. I thought maybe I'd be a cook, but because I was a butcher, but no, they did that. So every other week we got to go into the field with the trainees and shoot an Honest John.
Okay. So what was an Honest John?
Honest John was just a straight rocket that got shot off from a truck on a rail. No guiding system or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You aimed it and they just fired it.
Okay, so it was a surface-to-surface missile, basically, that
Yes.
you would use in battle.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so they were expensive, so they only fire one of them
Yeah, oh yeah.
per training group.
Yeah, and
Okay.
then the lacrosse was the one that had 4 wings, bigger, and they were actually controlled.
Okay.
And that one I only got to see him shoot once.
Okay. Now, how long did you stay at Fort Sill?
Oh, no more than 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
Then they sent me to San Francisco.
All right. But while you were in Fort Sill, did you stay on the base the whole time, or could you go into town?
No, oh well, yeah, we had Fort Sill, Oklahoma, is close by. Well, Chickasha was the town that was close by. Yeah, I went into town with my buddies, and I've been to Oklahoma City a couple times. But I had a room on the base. We actually had a roommate. He was a nice young man, black guy.
Mm-hmm.
We had a great time together all the time. We always went out. So.
Okay.
And then,
So you would go into town with your black roommate.
yeah.
Okay. Now, because Oklahoma is a place that had been segregated. I'm not sure how was it segregated when you were there, or could a black guy and a white guy go into the same places?
No, I don't think so. The only segregation I ever witnessed was in '56 when I was in Kalamazoo on a layover between trains, and I walked into the wrong waiting room. I didn't know.
Kalamazoo had a black waiting room?
Yeah.
Okay. That probably shouldn't have, because they were in Michigan. But But that's what you saw. Okay.
Or was it? Maybe I wasn't Kalamazoo. But anyway, yeah.
But you did see it. I mean, it could have been, I mean, actually, it could have been, I don't know, I mean, if you had ever gone as far south as Maryland or something like that, then you might have. But anyway.
But I remember being told, hey, you're in the wrong room.
Okay.
Maybe it was not Kalamazoo. Like I say, it's a long time ago.
Sure, sure. But the thing is that there are incidences of different kinds of segregation that happen in the North as well, and so different things may have happened in different places. But you did see a little bit of that. But anyway, but in Oklahoma it wasn't a problem.
Not that I recall.
Okay. All right. But you say so you're Fort Sill. Okay. Now you go to San Francisco.
Yeah.
What were you doing there?
Oh, I worked in the 6th Army headquarters, and well, I was running what we called IBM machines. You remember the old IBM machines with the little cards with all the holes punched in them? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had the machine I did was a collator, I believe they called it. It's putting stuff in alphabetical or numerical order. Mm-hmm. That's all my job was. We actually only worked about 2, maybe 3 days a month in the first of the month when they had to have their head count or something. Yeah. So I had family living in San Francisco, so I saw a lot of San Francisco and the surrounding areas. Yes, I did. I like San Francisco.
Oh, yeah. Probably a nicer place to be stuck for a while than Oklahoma, I suppose.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Okay. All right. So how long did you stay in San Francisco?
You know, and again, not very long.
Okay, a few months or?
Yeah, maybe, well, maybe another 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
Then they put me on a plane to Fort Dix, and from the Fort Dix, they put me on a plane to Iceland.
Okay.
From San Francisco to Iceland, from sunny days to snow deep, you know, and living in Quonset huts, and where the nights were 4 hours long in the summer, and 20 hours long, and the days were 20 hours long in the winter.
In the summer.
Oh well.
Yeah, yeah. So 4 hours of night in the summer and 20 hours of night in the winter.
Yeah, exactly. And we lived in those. I was there for only 6 months. Then they moved the whole unit out of there. They just disbanded it. We took our 2 tanks home. We had only 2 tanks, and I worked in supply in there, so it was another easy job. Okay. And we went back to New York by boat, and that was an awesome sight to come into New York Harbor, and there's the Statue of Liberty, and of course the city itself. Okay. Beautiful.
Let's back up to Iceland a little bit. What was your unit's job in Iceland? Why were you there?
Actually, the whole unit was there to protect the airport for 48 hours. And that was it. I worked in the supply part of it, and every once in a while we went on camping trips out there in the snow when I was there in the winter.
All right. And how much contact did you have with the people there?
Didn't.
Okay.
Did not. Somehow I never been off the base.
Okay.
But then this is all hindsight. I was more or less, I figured, well, I'm fine here, I'm staying here. And I didn't realize that there was a lot to see out there. And what I did see, though, is they had this volcano out there in the water, I believe, just outside down, and I think sometimes you could see it in the smoke or something.
Okay. Now, was there a lot of traffic at the airport? Were there military aircraft going in and out?
No, no. It was a stopover for a lot of civilian aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a lot of these Lockheed Constellations in there. And one time, it's not like you were in the airport today. You could actually walk up to the plane and say hi to the pilots. I says, I'm from the Netherlands, and he says, well, what are you flying? This is a cargo plane.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, what's your cargo? Canaries. I couldn't believe it. A plane full of canaries. Why would they come canaries from the Netherlands to the United States? I don't know. They go all over, but they said, well, the canaries will help you fly the plane.
Right.
Then we came back from there. It was not very cold in Iceland because it actually gets warmed up by the Gulf Stream.
Right.
That goes right by there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you went up into the mountains, it would get cold. And that's where the snow was. But.
And I understand that, well, there's a lot of hot water there, so volcanic.
Right. Okay. So it wasn't terribly exciting duty, but.
Nope. My whole Army career was not really exciting, and I never saw combat. The closest we came was in my reserves to anything.
All right. So you come back. Now, when you came back and you went to New York Harbor, was that right before you got discharged, or did you have?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now, along the way, when did you get married?
Afterward.
Okay.
After I got out of the service on November 18, 1960, I was home and I met this girl on an office party I was invited to, and a year later I was going to marry her. And I wanted to marry her on November 18, 1961. Her father got, what do you mean, November 18? Yeah, you're not going to get married on the 18th. It's during deer season. We're hunters. He was a hunter.
Okay.
So he moved it up to November 11, and which turned out to be a very special date. November 11 is Veterans Day.
Right.
On our 50th anniversary, we was 11/11. The numbers were
11/11/11. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was that was our 50th wedding anniversary and so forth. It's been 55 now. We are working on 56.
All right. Now, in the meantime, though, you do stay in. You're in the reserves when you get out.
Yes.
Okay. And then, and you said that and it's that period when you got closest to getting into something. So explain what happened.
Yeah. Well, in the reserves, we had 6 LCM landing craft, and we did carry a truck or two now and then when we went up. We had our meetings every week. Wednesdays, I believe. I drove in from Grand Rapids. And
so where was the reserve unit based?
In Muskegon.
Okay.
In Muskegon,
right.
And we had, of course, Muskegon Lake. There's their lake, something, whatever. And we also, sometimes we have a weekend drill where we would go to Pentwater and invade Pentwater.
Okay. Now describe an LCM. This is the landing craft that you have.
It's one of those that on the beach, that's how they landed in Normandy. And you drive your vehicles off and your troops or what have you. We didn't do any of that, but we did go on the beach and land it. And then, of course, when we were coming in, there was this little airplane flying around dropping sacks of flour on us. see if they could. Those were supposed to be bombs. Never got hit with one, but that's what it was supposed to be. That was our reserve. And then we were told we were on standby for the Cuban thing.
Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. Yeah.
When Kennedy was in there, and that, what year was that?
62.
Yeah, 62. We were on standby, and that's also the year that Kennedy got killed in
63.
63. And I remember when he got killed, I was on our way home from deer season at the cabin. And we were on standby for that. We were to be shipped to Key West, I think. There was a unit there with, I guess they had landing craft.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I was, I was more interested in my life. We were expecting a kid, and then they more or less discharged me.
Right. You get switched from the active reserve to the inactive reserve.
Yeah.
And then you have your final discharges in 1964. So
I believe so.
Yeah, 'cause that's what you had on the paper there from that. Okay. Now let's see. Let's think back. Let's think back again to the period there while you're still living in Europe, whether during the war or after it. Are there other things that you remember that stand out for you that you haven't brought into the story yet?
No, not really. Like it says, eating tulip bulbs and sugar beets and the bombs and the troops.
Okay.
Then the people under the house.
Okay.
No.
Now, did you see very much of the Germans? I mean, would they patrol on the streets or be out there?
They were out there, but they were very much spread around. I was one time I was sent with a coupon to the bakery to go get a loaf of bread, and it was about a 4-block walk. And as I was walking, there were soldiers standing on each German soldiers standing on each street corner with their guns. And one of them must not have liked me. And he said something like, "Nach Hause gehen," go home.
Right.
That's what that meant, because, and no, we didn't see much, but they were out there. And also what we did have, I forgot to mention this, we had what we called, there was a soup kitchen. We had those. And there was one close by my house, and you could go bring a pan, a dish or something, and they would give you a scoop of the
Whatever
chicken
they
broth,
had. Yeah.
chicken broth with you could see a dot of fat floating on top of it. And one time we were getting that, and my sister, who was a year younger, was 2 people back, because you were only allowed to have 1 scoop per family. Well, my sister said something to me, and the guy come on, says, you know her? And she said, "Yeah, he's my brother."
Oh.
So, but that's how bad it was. That's really how bad it was. So I just, and what else did I forget? No.
Did you ever hear anything about collaborators, or were you aware of them?
Oh, those, yes. Yes, they would round these people up when somebody knew of one. Somehow the word would get also to my dad, would hear about it, and they would round them up and they would shave their heads.
Okay. So that was after the war then. So when the
I
war
believe
when the
so,
war
yeah.
ended.
That was right after, like I say,
Right.
seeing the troops go
Okay.
through. Yeah, that's what happened. They did that. I have seen them marching down the street.
Right. Because there were, in the Netherlands, there were a fair number of people who did collaborate with the
Yes.
Germans. The people as a whole, though, really did not.
No,
And that's
no.
why they didn't give you any food.
Yeah, but you know, the collaborators were mostly women.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Nazi whores.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what they are.
yeah.
That's, I mean, plain English.
Mm-hmm.
They're Nazi whores. So they would, and then of course the men, but they would march them down the street. They would string them together, and they shaved their heads. And I don't know where they went or what they did. And of course in The Hague we had, as I mentioned before, the Peace Palace, the International
Right.
Court,
Mm-hmm.
that got saved. Beautiful building.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a good story here. So.
Well, you know, I felt obligated to tell this.
Mhm.
My children know, and they must mention it to their children, because so much of this is, well, it's done, it's being forgotten. But this was sheer madness.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of suffering, and it was not good. And I like I say, my father-in-law being there, and my brother having to leave. He never talked to his kids too much about it, and I find that. No, I wish he had, because I would myself would know more,
Mm-hmm.
because we did not see him very often, him living in Canada.
Yeah.
So, and then there's but my nephew in London, Ontario, his wife's father was 90-some years old. I believe it was in December, he died. And then I found out some more. He was in the Netherlands,
Mm-hmm.
right there. He may have been he was actually in the Canadian Army.
Mm-hmm.
For 6 years. He was in Europe, all over, France, Belgium, Germany, Netherlands, Luxembourg. And when he died, I went over there in London, and I wanted to be one of the pallbearers. Who knows, if he was right there by me or not. I mean, that's a 1 in a million chance,
Right.
but he was there, just like my father-in-law was.
This is a second session with Anthony DeJager. He had told us a story about living in the Netherlands as a child and then coming to the U.S. and winding up in the U.S. Army. In that session, he managed to leave out one kind of important piece of that, and it comes immediately after the end of World War II, when the Canadians had liberated the Netherlands, including The Hague, where he was living. And he also wants to talk a little bit about a couple of people he knows who had actually helped liberate the area.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, when the war ended, as the story was told, which by the way, was liberated by my side of the country, was liberated by the Canadians, and the other side was liberated by the Americans. And eventually, I married my wife when I'm here in America, and this was her father, who was on the east side of the Netherlands by the German border when they never liberated. And this man here, by the name of Henry Mutton, a Canadian that lived in London, Ontario, Canada, he was on the west side and liberated. The west side of the Netherlands is back in 1945. I do have his story on paper, and then very shortly after the war ended, I remember being put on a bus. My brother was still not home. I was in a bus, and I got sent to an airport. We got to the airport, and I found myself, I remember myself being inside a airplane that was also used for parachute jumpers. I believe it's a C-47. I didn't know. I know now that it's a C-47. And I got flown to London, England. And I remember landing there and then put on a bus in London, and we wound up either Manchester or I can't think of the other name, Manchester, or anyway, I went to two different would-be army camps, I believe, and because we slept in the barracks, I was 1 month in Manchester, and 1 month, it was Liverpool. Mm-hmm. Then they put us in Liverpool. The time I was there, I can't quite be sure, but I assume it was a month in each one.
Okay. Now, why were you there?
Well, you know, I didn't know why I was there. I was an 8-year-old child and taken away from my parents, not taken away, I was, because we had to rebuild our bodies. We were very skinny, very sick, you know, I mean, not healthy. Mm-hmm. And we were sent there through the Red Cross. I talked to my sister the day before yesterday, who was in the Netherlands. She said she missed me very much, and she was looking for me over the whole house. She's 2 years younger than me. Mm-hmm. And she said that it was either the Red Cross or where our father worked, at the Department of Interior. Mm-hmm. And so we were there to put some meat back on our bones, because we were skinny.
Okay. There simply wasn't enough food in the Netherlands for the population.
No, we were starving, mm-hmm. practically starving. But we got liberated in time, like I say, but the two great gentlemen were there at that particular time. So from there, from Liverpool, I believe, we got sent to Scotland. Mm-hmm. And I wound up in Dumfries, Scotland. I remember the house. It was the house of a high school principal. And I even remember him bringing me to school over there, mm-hmm. during the day. And the house that I lived in was an old house, typically British, Scottish, English, whichever. It was built inside a wall. I remember that. And my bedroom was up above, and I remember looking in the morning when I looked out the window, I could see a castle on the other side of the river. And these things stand in my mind. I remember with the man took me for walks many times along that river into the town. And another thing that sticks in my mind is there was a walled stairways from the road up above to the road down below, and there was this big lantern at night. And every night I saw a lamplighter go by to turn the gas on for the light. I remember that.
Okay.
And his wife cooked and fed me every day, and not knowing any English, but she taught me what hungry meant. And if I wanted something to eat, all I had to say, I'm hungry, and they would find me. I mean, I spent 2 months with these people, and other children from that group were at different houses, and I remember being at a couple of them, and it was, you know, just devastating because I missed my family. My sister missed me terribly, as she told me the other day on the Skype. And when it was over and it was time for us to go back, they sent us back on a cargo ship, and we slept in the cargo holds. And it was just a big empty space, and we slept on the floor, as I remember. And one time it was during the night. I don't know why they sent us back during the night. That was strange. But one time during the night, I remember the boat stopping. And they're closing these doors around us. And later on, my dad told me that they informed him that there was a danger of a mine in the water. So obviously they stopped the boat, and we got warned about a mine. So that was, then we got home, and of course I was back with my family and my sister and but my older brother was not home yet at that time. He was still, we knew where he was then, I guess. He was up north in Friesland, living on a farm that took him in, and that's where he lived. And this is being his father-in-law, his daughter-in-law's father, who was buried with honors, and I was privileged to be a pallbearer at that funeral last December. So this segment here just needs to be added to my account of the Second World War ending.
All right. Okay. Well, that is how this will work. We will add it on to the end as part of the video, and it's an important piece and something that people don't know very much about.
No, and it is amazing how these things are. They're just, I'll never forget. So I hope this video will tell my children, who can show that to their children, and then I got 15 great-grandchildren who might see that their or their great-grandfather was in the war. I'm not a hero. I was not in the war, but I survived it. I survived it.
Yes, and it's valuable to have those first-hand accounts. So thank you very much again for coming
Well,
and sharing the story.
you're more than welcome. I'm glad to tell my story.